I think everybody here has either heard of or seen the death of Boromir, whether it's in the books and you've read it, or whether it's seen in the movie. It's always such a heartbreaking moment. And I think most of the people here are familiar with the scene, so I don't have to explain it. But for the people here that haven't heard of, or read, or seen the death of Boromir at the hands of the Uruk-hai, let me inform you about the following. So, what I decided to do today is change it up. I decided to rewrite the scene and turn it into a more horror story type of scene. If you like the video, make sure to leave a like, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and if you like this type of content, let me know as well, because then I'll keep doing them. I'll just rewrite some Lord of the Rings scenes to make them a little more scary, or make them just a little different than what they're like either in the movie or in the books, whichever you prefer. And let's dive right into this horror show of Boromir's death. And before we get into this, it's gonna sound ridiculous, but if you want, you could close your eyes and you could listen to the story, I guess, if it helps you to imagine the way that this would be. When I came up with this, I also did the same. So I didn't close my eyes, of course, but I thought to myself, okay, what would the Uruk-hai look like, or what would Aragorn do, or what would Boromir do, or feel, or something like that. And it's easier to experience when you either listen to a story thoughtfully, or of course watch one of the movies. But this isn't a movie, this is what I've written. So it's going to be different. It's going to be different than the story that you know. So yeah, try to give your own feel to it. Think like what he's going to look like, what he feels, what he thinks, whatever. Yeah, and let's see where the story leads. The horn of Gondor echoed through the trees, sharp and desperate. Aragorn froze in the clearing, the urgency of Boromir's call ringing in his ears. He sprinted through the underbrush, the sound of orcish war cries growing closer. Boromir was in danger, and there was no time to waste. Boromir stood alone in the forest clearing, breathing heavily, surrounded by a sea of Uruk-hai. His sword gleamed, dripping with the black blood of orcs already fallen. He gripped his blade tighter, his knuckles white with strain. He knew he wouldn't survive this fight, but he would not falter. He would protect Merry and Pippin whatever the cost. But something was wrong. As the Uruk-hai circled closer, Boromir noticed their eyes glinting with something more than bloodlust. They were watching him, their movements unnaturally slow, as if savoring his despair. Their snarls twisted into grotesque smiles. It felt like they were playing with him. Suddenly, the world around him seemed to change. The trees grew darker, their shadows stretching unnaturally long. The light in the forest seemed to fade, and the air turned thick and oppressive. Boromir's breaths came in gasps, each one more labored than the last, as if the very atmosphere sought to crush him. The forest felt alive, but not with nature. It felt hungry. Boromir swung his sword wildly, cutting down the nearest orc, but something was wrong. The sound of the orc's body hitting the ground was wrong, like a hollow thud, as if the earth swallowed it whole. He didn't have time to process it. Another orc lunged forward, but this one's eyes were different, wide, glassy, too human. Its lips parted to reveal a grotesque, jagged smile, and it spoke in a voice that sounded like the wind through a graveyard. "We're already dead," it whispered. Boromir's stomach churned. He stabbed the creature through the chest, but the body didn't fall. Instead, it leaned closer, blood pouring from its mouth, black and thick, splattering onto Boromir's face. Soon you will be too. Panic gripped Boromir's heart. His sword felt heavier with every swing, as if the weight of his impending doom had manifested physically. The faces of the Uruk-hai began to blur, and then something worse happened. They stopped looking like orcs. He blinked, but there was no mistaking it. Merry and Pippin stood before him, their eyes hollow, blood dripping from their small bodies. "You failed us," Merry said, his voice echoing in Boromir's head like a distant scream. "You're too weak," Pippin added, his voice a whisper filled with venom. They were no longer his friends. They were twisted, nightmarish versions of themselves, accusing and haunting. Boromir stumbled back, but there was no escape. The Uruk-hai behind him hissed and laughed, a hideous sound that reverberated in the air, mixing with the dark whispers of the forest. His heart pounding in his chest, faster and faster, until he thought it might burst. And then came the first arrow. Boromir gasped, feeling the sharp, cold bite of the arrowhead pierce through his flesh. But it wasn't just pain. It was something more. He could feel the coldness of death creeping in, like ice spreading through his veins. The Uruk-hai captain, Lurtz, stepped forward, grinning, his face twisted into something barely human. There was a hunger in his eyes, but it wasn't for battle. It was for Boromir's soul. As he drew back his bow for a second shot, the world around Boromir dimmed, and the forest became a living nightmare. The trees seemed to twist and writhe, their branches gnarled like skeletal fingers reaching for him. The air filled with whispers, but not in any language he could understand, but filled with ancient malice. The faces of the orcs warped, turning into hideous, ghostly reflections of the men Boromir had fought alongside in Gondor. Their hollow eyes stared at him, accusing, mocking his failure. "You cannot protect them," one of the ghostly figures hissed, its voice a chorus of the damned. The second arrow struck. Boromir's knees buckled, and he fell to the ground. But the Uruk-hai did not finish him yet. They surrounded him, their dead eyes gleaming with sick delight, watching his agony, savoring every moment. The whispers grew louder, now a cacophony in his head. Boromir's vision blurred as he clutched the wound in his chest, but he forced himself to look up. Through the haze, he saw the twisted forms of Merry and Pippin once more, now chained and dragged away by the Uruk-hai. Their voices echoed in his mind, no longer the innocent hobbits he had sworn to protect, but twisted, spectral figures. They were gone, just as his strength was failing. The third arrow struck. The world became a blur of darkness and pain. Boromir's breathing slowed, each gasp like a knife in his chest. The Uruk-hai no longer cared for him. They turned the attention to their prize, the hobbits. Boromir lay there, abandoned, his vision fading, and the forest swallowing him whole. Then a shadow loomed over him. Boromir blinked, trying to focus, and saw a familiar face. Aragorn knelt beside him, his expression one of anguish. The world around them seemed to return to normal. The twisted faces of the orcs were just orcs again, and the forest no longer whispered. The nightmare faded, but the horror remained in Boromir's heart. "They took the little ones," Boromir whispered, his voice weak, his body trembling with the weight of his wounds. "I tried to take the ring from Frodo," he admitted, his voice breaking. Shame and guilt filled his eyes as he gazed at Aragorn, now fully himself, though broken and dying. "I have failed you all." "No, Boromir," "You fought bravely," Aragorn said, his voice filled with sorrow, his hand resting on Boromir's brow. Boromir smiled weakly, a flicker of relief in his eyes, even as the life drained from him. "My brother, my captain, my king." And with those words, Boromir's breath ceased, his hand falling limp into Aragorn's. The forest was quiet again, but the shadow of the horror Boromir had endured lingered, a scar on the soul of the fallen warrior. And that is the reimagined story of how Boromir came to die in The Fellowship of the Ring. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to leave a like I said. Also, if you liked the video, let me know, because then I can think of some other parts to rewrite. Maybe the Passes of the Dead, for example, or something like that. Maybe in Moria, maybe some other things. Maybe the Weathertop scene. Yeah, let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you enjoyed the version that I wrote with the more psychedelic, well, not psychedelic, maybe psychology part of it. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys very soon. Bye.